My name is Margaret Collins. I am 56 years old. My best friend and I built our bakery together, and for 18 years, I never once imagined that friendship could end the way ours did, not with a slow fade, not with a quiet drifting apart the way some friendships go, but with her standing in the doorway of my own office one ordinary Tuesday morning, smiling the same warm smile I had known since we were 14 years old, and saying words that tipped the floor out from under me. This business is mine now. I want to start further back than that morning, though, because I don't think anyone can understand how much that sentence cost me without understanding everything that came before it. Helen Brooks and I met in the 9th grade, assigned to the same lab table in a chemistry class neither of us particularly cared about. We became inseparable within a month. She was the one who talked me through my first heartbreak, who stood beside me at my wedding, who sat with me in a hospital waiting room the night my youngest was born because my husband had gotten stuck in traffic and I refused to be alone. When I think about the shape of my own life, Helen is woven through nearly every important thread of it, long before either of us ever thought about flour or ovens or the smell of bread rising before dawn. We opened the bakery together 18 years ago, using a modest inheritance from my mother and a loan my husband, Robert, insisted on structuring very carefully, a decision that would matter far more than either of us understood at the time. Helen and I worked side by side those early years in ways that still feel, looking back, almost impossibly hard. We were there at 4 a.m, flour dusted into the creases of our hands, laughing through exhaustion, building something out of nothing the way only two genuinely devoted friends can. We celebrated every small victory together, our first big catering order, the first time a food magazine mentioned us, the year we finally paid off enough debt to give ourselves both a small raise. For 18 years, there was no name I trusted more than hers, no person I would have called first with either good news or bad. Robert passed away 6 years ago, quite suddenly, and something in me went quiet for a long time afterward, the particular kind of quiet that grief leaves behind, where you keep functioning, keep showing up, but some essential part of the color has gone out of ordinary days. Helen was there through all of it, the way she always had been. She took on more responsibility at the bakery so I could take the time I needed, and I remember being profoundly grateful for that, for having a business partner who was also, more importantly, someone who genuinely loved me. Then, 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with an illness that required months of difficult treatment. I won't dwell on the details of that period. Anyone who has gone through serious treatment, or watched someone they love go through it, understands the particular exhaustion of it, the way it consumes not just your body but your entire capacity to think about anything beyond simply getting through each day. I stepped back from the bakery almost entirely during that time. I trusted Helen completely to run things in my absence. I signed whatever needed signing, half paying attention some days, because I trusted her, and because I genuinely did not have the energy left over to scrutinize paperwork after chemotherapy appointments. I want to be honest and say that I don't think Helen set out, from the very beginning, to take the business from me. I think, and I've had a long time to sit with this, to turn it over from every angle, that it happened slowly, the way most betrayals of that scale do. She started making decisions without consulting me, small ones at first, easy to justify given my absence. Then larger ones. She began speaking to vendors and staff in ways that positioned her, gradually, as the true owner rather than my partner. I imagine, somewhere in that slow accumulation of authority, something shifted in her, the way power sometimes reveals a version of a person that circumstance had simply never given room to surface before. By the time I was well enough to return, the bakery I walked back into didn't entirely feel like mine anymore. I noticed it in small ways first. Staff members who had worked for me for a decade began directing questions to Helen instead, out of habit, I assumed, because she'd been the one present those long months. I noticed the way vendors addressed their invoices, the way certain administrative decisions had been made without my name attached to them at all. I told myself I was imagining the shift, that grief and illness had made me oversensitive to things that had simple, innocent explanations. Then came that Tuesday morning. Helen walked into my office, the office I had personally decorated, with photographs of Robert and my children on the shelf, with the small watercolor of the original bakery storefront that my mother had painted the year we opened, and she smiled at me, that same warm, familiar smile, and told me the business was hers now. She laid it out calmly, almost gently, as though she were doing me a kindness by explaining it clearly. The staff, she said, answered to her now. The bank accounts had been restructured under her name during my treatment, with what she characterized as necessary operational authority. Most people in the business, she said, quite simply believed she was the owner at this point, and had for some time. She produced documents, genuine ones, signed during the haze of my worst months, documents I only vaguely remembered agreeing to, trusting her explanations of what they were for without reading every line the way I should have. I sat in my own office and felt something I can only describe as a kind of vertigo, 18 years of shared history, of trust built brick by brick through thousands of ordinary mornings, seeming to dissolve in the space of a single conversation. I remember thinking, with a strange, detached clarity even as my chest ached, that I had survived a serious illness only to lose, in one Tuesday morning, the thing I had built to give my life purpose after Robert died. I said very little to her that day. I told her I needed time to think, and she nodded, magnanimous in her apparent victory, and left my office as though she had done nothing more dramatic than update me on a routine business matter. The following week, she called an all-staff meeting. I attended, still uncertain exactly what I intended to do, still turning the entire situation over in my mind late into every night. Helen stood at the front of the kitchen, in front of every employee we had built this business alongside, and announced, with warmth in her voice, that I would be retiring. The staff applauded. Some of them looked at me with genuine, if misinformed, affection, clapping for what they believed was a well-earned rest after my illness. I stood near the back of that kitchen where I had spent 18 years of early mornings, and I let the applause finish completely before I spoke. "Have you finished?" I asked her. The kitchen went quiet. Helen's smile faltered slightly, though she recovered it quickly, clearly assuming I intended some gracious parting words for the staff who had gathered. I had brought one folder with me that morning. Just one. I had carried it in my bag for 3 days by that point, ever since a very long conversation with our family attorney, a man Robert had trusted implicitly, who had drawn up our original business structure 18 years earlier with a level of caution I hadn't fully appreciated at the time. When we first opened the bakery, Robert had insisted, over what I remember as my own mild objections at the time, I thought it was excessive caution, unnecessary complexity for two best friends who trusted each other completely, that the physical building, the equipment, and the trademark itself all be held by a separate family holding company. A company that belonged, entirely and exclusively, to me. Helen ran the day-to-day operations, and she ran them well, and she had every right to the authority that role carried. But she had never, at any point in 18 years, actually owned the building we baked in, the ovens we baked with, or even the name printed on our storefront and our packaging. I opened that folder in front of the entire staff and explained, calmly, exactly what it contained. The deed to the property. The equipment titles. The trademark registration. All of it, entirely legal, entirely unambiguous, entirely mine. Helen could run a business. She had, in fact, been running one, quite capably, for years. But without the building, without the equipment, without the name that had come to mean something in our town over 18 years, she could not continue operating so much as a single additional day. I watched something collapse in her expression as the staff around us began to understand what I was explaining. It wasn't triumph I felt, watching that understanding land. I want to be honest about that too. It was something closer to grief, a fresh, specific grief, different from anything Robert's death or my illness had given me, the grief of watching a 27-year friendship reveal itself, in the space of a single meeting, as something I had fundamentally misunderstood. I did not call the police. I want to be clear about that, because people ask me this often when I tell this story, expecting some dramatic legal reckoning. Everything Helen had done, in the narrowest legal sense, existed in a gray area of documents signed under circumstances she had, at minimum, failed to explain honestly to me, and possibly documents that would not have survived serious legal scrutiny, but pursuing that path would have cost years and money and an entirely different kind of exhaustion than the one I'd already survived. I had no interest in spending whatever years I had left fighting a legal battle against someone I had once loved as a sister. Instead, I simply told her, quietly, in front of no one, once the staff meeting had ended and the kitchen had emptied out. "You didn't lose this business today," I said. "You lost it the day you chose greed over friendship." She didn't have an answer for that. I don't think there was one available to her. I spent the following year rebuilding, slowly and deliberately. I want to say it was easy, that I marched forward with unshakable confidence, but that wouldn't be honest. There were nights I sat alone in my kitchen at home, the same kitchen where Helen and I used to test recipes together decades earlier, and grieve not just the business but the entire friendship, 27 years of it, gone in a way that felt permanent and unrecoverable. Betrayal by someone who loves you carries a particular weight that betrayal by a stranger never could, because it forces you to question your own judgment about every good thing you believed was true. But I also had something Helen, in the end, did not, a genuine foundation, both legal and personal, built on decades of actually earning people's trust rather than simply occupying a position of authority during my absence. I found a new location a few streets over from the original bakery, smaller, but with good bones and good light through the front windows. I brought the original equipment with me, because it was legally mine to bring. I kept the name, because it was legally mine to keep. And I began, slowly, quietly, reaching out to the staff who had worked alongside me for years before my illness, not asking anyone to choose sides, simply letting them know where I would be, and what I was building. On opening day of the new bakery, a year almost to the week after that staff meeting, there was a line outside the door before we had even unlocked it. I stood behind the counter that first morning, flour already on my hands within the hour, and felt something in my chest ease for the first time in a very long while. A remarkable number of my former staff came back to me voluntarily, one by one, over the following weeks, people who had watched what happened that day in the old kitchen, who had quietly understood exactly what kind of person they wanted to build their working lives alongside. I never asked any of them to explain their choice. Most of them didn't need to. I don't know exactly what became of the original bakery under Helen's management, beyond a few pieces of second-hand information that reached me through mutual acquaintances over the following year, struggles with vendors who had trusted our original arrangement, a name that no longer meant what it once had once it became clear who actually held it. I take no particular satisfaction in whatever difficulties she faced. I simply built what I knew how to build, the way I had always known how to build it, with the people willing to build it alongside me. Money can build a business. But only trust can keep it alive, trust between partners, trust between a business and the people it employs, trust between a name and the community that decides, every single day, whether that name still deserves to be believed in. Helen had the operational skill to run our bakery for 18 years. What she never had, in the end, was the character to hold on to the thing that skill was actually built upon. I think about our friendship sometimes, the early version of it, the 14-year-old girls at that chemistry lab table who had no idea what the next 4 decades would hold for either of them. I have found, to my own surprise, that I don't carry the anger toward her that I once assumed I always would. Anger, like grief, takes energy I would rather spend on the people and the work still in front of me. But forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't require rebuilding what was broken. Some things, once they reveal what they were actually made of underneath, simply cannot be reconstructed into what you once believed them to be. Could you ever forgive a friend who betrayed you after 27 years?